moving on to compliance features. Alright, transport rules. Alright, those of you that use Outlook, hopefully look at this and say, you know what, that looks familiar, right? The rules wizard that you're used to using in Outlook looks very, very similar to this, and that's not by chance, right? So you can do almost anything with these transport rules. So you can see here it's saying between distribution list and distribution list. That doesn't quite make a lot of sense, but I'll explain this specific scenario in a second. But for example, I could say if emails come in from specific people, and then over here it'll say people, and then if I click on that particular thing and I say, alright, these are the people that I want you to do something with, this is where we're selecting, this screen is where we're selecting what we want to match, and then in this screen over here we basically say what we want to do. Okay, so this is a matching screen and this is a do screen. Okay, so there's an action section. Alright, and I won't step through all this list, right? You can read it on screen or just play with it yourself, but it is extremely extensive, right? You can do almost anything with this thing. Now, just to touch on one of the things, a term that you'll probably hear from Microsoft, they're coining this thing called an ethic wall. Alright, and this thing here is probably a good example. So, what an ethic wall is, or an ethical wall, is over here we've got stock traders, right? So let's say that I'm a stock trader and I'm a little bit shady. Okay, so I've got a bunch of stock that I want to dump. Okay, I need to sell because I know it's a bad stock and I need to get rid of it. Right? So if this was completely open, what I could do is I could get in touch with a stock analyst. And he's my buddy, alright? And this is Joe. Alright? Joe's my buddy. So I say, Joe, buddy pal, I want you to please write a report, alright, where you say that company XYZ is fantastic, best thing, you need to buy, alright? When that happens and Joe's report comes out, I basically dump my stock. Okay? Now, obviously this is very unethical, okay? But this is an example of what could happen if these systems weren't there to try and act as a bit of a net to stop it. So what an ethical wall is that it's basically a way of putting a barrier, if you like, between entities, and this is why it's between one distribution list and another distribution list. And what's happening here is that if I catch a match, because remember this is a matching screen, then under my actions, okay, then over here it's saying I'm going to send a bounce back message to sender and enhanced status code, right? In other words, basically say, hey, our corporate policy says that communication between traders and analysts is not allowed, and vice versa, right? So therefore you can stop that kind of thing. So it does enable you to set up these ethical walls within your company. Okay, another thing you can do here is message classification. So if I'm a user on Outlook 2007, I can click on my Office button, head down on through to permissions, and here basically see a list of message classifications. Now these classifications are defined by my admins, okay? Not just the names, but what they do, right? So for example, here all that might happen is that, so this is the AC privileged, right? So the attorney-client privilege. It might just simply display a banner, right? But I might have other message classifications that, for example, require encryption, right? And so on and so forth, right? So you can define different types of criteria for the message classifications. Alright, journaling. With journaling, it's basically a way of saying, well, if I've got user A wanting to talk to user B and they're sending email, well, at the same time I need to dump a copy of that communication through to a separate source for compliance reasons and whatever else may tickle your fancy. So if you wanted to set up journaling, you can actually do it by database, by user, or by distribution list as well. Okay. Now we can set up journaling such that if you like, this is my external and my internal. So in other words, you know, these might be other corporate companies out here, and these are my employees. I can basically say whenever this line is crossed from external to internal, I basically want to journal it. Or I might say, well, from internal to internal, I want to journal that as well. Or I might say, well, you know what? Let's journal everything. Why not? Okay. So we can do any one of those three. And transport rules, like we talked about on the last screen, you really have a huge degree of flexibility with these, but you can create transport rules based on recipient, message sender, content, and about 100 other things. Right? They're very, very powerful. Alright, this is a look at what the journaling creation wizard looks like. So, like we said, we can either do global, internal, or external. And what happens here, for example, is we're saying, okay, the journal email address. So in other words, this is where we're dumping copies, if you like, of the messages. And this part here basically says, if you like, what we're trying to look at. Right? So we're trying to match on this distribution list called executives. So whenever anybody sends anything to any people that belong to the executive distribution list, it's going to put a copy of that in through to this SEC compliance email address or mailbox. And then if we were to check that particular mailbox, we'll see the header type information, which does include things like blind copies, and then also an attachment, which is the original email that was sent. Alright, archiving. Alright, let me just again draw A and B, and this is where we're storing the content. Now, as information flows from A to B, what we can do is we can actually journal that. So in other words, it's a way, if you like, snooping on that content and saying, okay, we actually want to grab a copy. But then when we place it on our store, this over here is what's called the archive. Okay, so that's the difference between journaling and archiving. So archiving is really just the dump house, if you like, of where we're storing it, versus journaling is the action of taking a copy of that particular message. Alright, so the situation here is again, we're now talking about archiving. So what happens is that as we're getting the journaled content, then we have to basically decide where are we going to put that content, right? So a copy of these messages, where are they going to go? Well, the first thing is that you can send it off through to an Exchange mailbox, which makes sense. The second thing, though, which is really nice, is that we can send that through to a SharePoint server site, right? So as an example, I might have a project that's going on, and I've got, you know, all of these members, and as these guys are intercommunicating, then there's obviously a distribution list. Okay, so as they're interacting with this distribution list, what I can do is set up a general entry, if you like, such that what it will do is that when it archives, it stores it in this SharePoint site. So now if any one of these users want to check on the entire history of any communication to do with this particular project, they can just hit this particular SharePoint site and have a look, right? And now with features like WebReady and link access, they can see that from pretty much anywhere, even from their mobile phones. Right, the last one that this one didn't include in this particular picture is that it can be any SMTP location, right? So in other words, this is third party. So if you find that, you know, Exchange isn't good enough for you and SharePoint isn't good enough for you, and you need this really high-end archival solution, then you can absolutely just send the journaling content off to archive to any SMTP address. Okay, I'm not going to touch on this because it's basically a bit of a recap, right? But so when messages are in transit, so as they're moving from A to B, right, we've got transport rules, which we looked at, which was the concept of that Outlook rules wizard kind of thing, but running on the Exchange server. Very, very powerful. We've got journaling capabilities, okay, such that they send everything through to an archive. So that's when messages are flowing through. Then in terms of messages at rest, we've got managed folders, which is the topic we're about to look at in the next couple of slides. And we also have information rights management. Now, I don't have slides for this, but just to quickly kind of touch on that, let's say, for example, that I've got an email, and I send, and this is me, okay, so this is Ron, and I send an email through to Mary. And Mary receives it, but as part of my email, this has confidential information, and it's only for Mary, okay? But Mary doesn't realize that, and she's now got a copy of my email, and she says, hey Bob, have a look at this, right? So what happens now is that suddenly I did not want this link to happen. So now Bob might read that email, and he gets very, very upset and comes back to me and says, hey, why'd you write this email on da-da-da, and why'd you send it to Mary? Well, rights management is a way of being able to address this, because what I can do is that before I send my email out through to Mary, I can actually stamp this email basically saying for your eyes only. Okay, this is an example, okay? There's no label that you say for your eyes only, right? But I can create a template, if you like, that is exactly that. And I can say, I'm not going to allow you to print the content, I'm not going to allow you to copy the content, I'm not going to allow you to forward the content, so on and so forth. Okay, you've got complete granular control. So that's basically what information rights management does. The other big thing, I guess, is that if I'm sending an email through to Mary, and Mary sends it off through to somebody out on the internet, it might be a competitor or something like that. What I can do is that when I send the email out, I can basically say nobody outside of our company can read this email. Okay, so when Mary gets it, since Mary is part of my company, then Mary can actually see it. But if she sends it through to somebody out on the outside, and out on the internet, this is, Joe Hacker, yeah, can't write, but this is, alright, Joe. Since Joe is not part of our corporate network, Joe cannot open that particular email, right? It's completely encrypted. Alright, so that's information rights management in a nutshell. So, heading on to managed folders. What managed folders are, it gives you the ability of having this managed folders entry within users' inbox, if you like, right? So within their actual mailbox. And it enables the administrator to control things like the ability of moving or deleting or renaming content, the number of total items that can be placed in there, and how long they're actually kept. Okay. Now, having said that, the user can interact with these folders, because again, they appear to be within their particular profile. So they can grab messages and put them into these particular managed folders. So what can happen is that within this managed folder, I might have a policy in there that says, well, you know what, keep it in there for 365 days, and after that, delete the items. Okay, so I could have created, maybe an archive folder, and after 365 days, chomp, right, delete. So it's just a different way of being able to manage content with policies, and grabbing those folders and putting them into everybody's mailbox, if you like, rather than having people have to interact with things like public folders and so forth. Okay, you're going to hear not much about public folders because Microsoft are basically getting rid of it. But pretty much everything is moving through to SharePoint in terms of being a storehouse of content that anyone can access. And with things like managed folders now, it's just another way of being able to get rid of public folders. Alright, so it can be implementation can be handled by the user. So what that means, like I explained before, you can grab content and the user can move stuff in there themselves. They can even create subfolders of existing subfolders if they want to as well, providing it's been allowed by the administrator. It can integrate with an archiving solution. So what that means is that you might set up the managed folder here, not just with a retention period of 365 days, but you've actually got a journaling entry which dumps all this in through to an archive. Okay, some sort of storehouse. And you might keep this indefinitely, perhaps. Right, and retention policies can also be configured by type. So I can say, voicemail is kept for 1 month, email is kept for 3 months, and faxes are kept for 2 years. Whatever, right? You've got full control. Right, managed folders. Now having a look at an example, if you like, in a little bit more detail. This is what I just talked about before. So I'll create an archive managed folder, and what I'm going to say is that it's going to expire the content after 365 days. It's going to start the clock ticking when we grab a message and we put it in through to the actual archive folder, right? That's where the clock starts ticking. And then after 365 days, it's going to move that content through to the deleted items. Okay. At the same time, you'll notice that if we create managed folders, we can configure specific messages to be displayed under the user's profile, which is really handy.